If any of you are gamers like myself, you're probably no stranger to gamer rage. That anger that bubbles up when you're on the back foot and you lose over and over again. It can be infuriating, and I'm sure we all know the meme of Mario Kart being the great destroyer of friendships. Though this kind of gamer rage is not confined to just video games. Board games and card games also have seen their fair share of people getting unreasonably angry at each other, and that is actually what our story is about today. A man who gets so unimaginably angry while playing a game with somebody close to him that it eventually leads to someone paying the ultimate price. Yokoso owashitare, and welcome back to yet another classical Japanese folktale. And if you like classical Japanese, you like Japanese history, or you just like storytelling in general, please don't forget to like the video, please subscribe to the channel, because there are plenty more of these stories where this came from. I promise you. And with all of that out of the way, let's just get into the actual tale. Once upon a time, ima wa mukashi. Somewhere on the island of Kyushu, the westernmost island of mainland Japan. I guess is that mainland Japan? But yeah, the westernmost island of mainland Japan. There was a man who was playing Sugoroku, also known in modern times as backgammon, with his brother-in-law, son-in-law. I'm honestly not entirely sure exactly what the nature of the relationship between these two men was, but they were related not by blood, but by marriage in some way. The first man was 1000% a warrior. A big, strong guy with a fearless heart, and a strong arm, and a temper to match both of them. And as was typical of male aristocrats at the time, especially warrior types like himself, he always kept some sort of blade on him. A large tachi when he was out and about, and a smaller sword, a smaller katana I think is the term that they use here, when he was indoors. Now, some of you sword connoisseurs, some of you Japanese sword connoisseurs might be like, but the katana is really long. No. Hold on. A long time ago, the katana was not actually long. Katana, like specifically in the Kojiki, it usually refers to a very small sword that you keep like as a sidearm, right? Well, I guess swords were technically already sidearms. Anyways, we're not going to get distracted here. But the other thing this guy did is he practically wore his bow on him like it was a fashion statement. Which was not typical of the time for most men, but that was the real defining feature of a warrior at this time. And this man was indeed a warrior. Now his brother-in-law, again, I'm just going to go with that. I'm just going to call him that, even though that might not be the actual most accurate way to describe him. But anyways, this brother-in-law, the second guy, with whom the first was playing Sugoroku, was no one of particular consequence, just your average mid-level aristocrat living out in Kyushu for whatever reason. But the important thing to know is that, unlike the first guy, this second guy, this brother-in-law, was no warrior. And so it just so happened that one day, these two were hanging out at the second guy's house, the non-warrior's house. And for whatever reason, they decided that they were going to play some aforementioned Sugoroku. Now, I've never played Sugoroku, aka backgammon, but if you haven't guessed, the thing about Sugoroku is that it's a competitive game. And thus, for those with short tempers, it can sometimes lead to very, very bad situations. And that's exactly what happened here. Everything was going fine, until a small dispute about a move popped up. But as things so often do, this small dispute grew and grew and grew, until it became a full-blown argument, with these two men shouting at each other over this one tiny issue. I mean, if you have in-laws, you can imagine that this one little dispute was just a catalyst, or may have been just a catalyst to bring more serious disagreements to the forefront, as these situations so often do. And I have no doubt that both of these men took it in turns to insult each other's character and drag up past grievances, both small and large, over the course of their arguing. Now, under such circumstances, getting angry is actually fairly understandable. Again, I myself can get rather put out when I'm losing at games, just ask my friends. I'm sure a lot of us do. But I'm also sure that almost none of us have tempers that are actually dangerous. This warrior guy, on the other hand, did. And being a warrior, he was not only prone to violence, but really, really good at it. And as things escalated, this warrior guy hit a breaking point, and suddenly lashed out and grabbed his brother-in-law by the motodori, basically a top knot. Then he used this leverage to pin his brother-in-law to the ground with one hand, and then with the other hand, he reached for his sword, or rather again his short sword, that he had stuck into the front part of his clothing. It was very clear what he was intending to do next. However, instead of immediately drawing the blade, he had to undo an obitori is what the story calls it, which is a kind of rope or leather strap that you use to tie a sword to your hip. Now, I'm not entirely sure why this warrior guy needed to do this to draw his sword, but he did. I'm guessing this rope, this obitori, was some kind of like anti-slip measure to keep your weapon from falling out of its sheath and potentially getting damaged or causing unwanted harm. Regardless, the second man could clearly see what the first one was trying to do, and realizing the danger he was in, the non-warrior guy desperately started grabbing at the sword's hilt in an attempt to keep it from getting drawn. Again, I'm not entirely sure how all of this works, but between holding his brother-in-law down with one hand and trying to untie the cord that prevented him from drawing his sword with the other, and his brother-in-law also trying to make sure that he didn't get the blade out, it soon became clear to the warrior dude that he was not going to be able to get his sword out under these conditions, and he gave up. But just because he gave up trying to use that specific weapon, that didn't mean his bloodlust had dissipated at all. So after a quick glance around the room, the warrior dude spied a large kitchen knife near the door on the far side. That would do. Don't even have to draw it from anything. It's ready to roll. And so, being a really strong man, this warrior started slowly dragging his helpless brother-in-law by the hair over to where this knife was. At first, the non-warrior guy didn't understand why he was being dragged to seemingly the other side of the room for no reason. But now that it was clear that the warrior guy had given up trying to get his sword out, he didn't fight back too awfully hard. That is, until he too happened to see the knife and realized what the warrior guy's intention was. If they made it over there and he got his hands on that knife, it was over for him. But warrior or no, this second guy wasn't going to go out without a fight, and he did everything to keep his enemy from making it to the knife. Thrashing, kicking, swatting, rolling, anything he could think of, he tried. Unfortunately for him though, this warrior guy was, again, not only just a big dude who was also really strong, but he was very well versed in fighting and skirmishes like this. I'm given to understand that at this time, while the most iconic form of combat was horseback archery, for those instances when warriors ran out of arrows or otherwise ended up in close quarters, fights looked more like deadly jujitsu matches, where two men would grapple each other, trying to pin their enemy in such a way that would allow them to stick a blade between their enemy's armor and take them out that way. If that really is the case, then you can understand just how bad of a situation this second guy was in. And, I mean, it was really bad. Now, as it so happened, this was all happening at the non-warrior guy's house. Now, normally there would be a few manservants around who could help with this situation, but it just so happened that, for whatever reason, the only servants in the house were a group of servant women and girls who were not too far off in the kitchen and had actually been busy making drinks. Now, these girls and women were completely unaware of what was going on because over the course of their sake brewing, they were enjoying a very lively chat amongst themselves. I mean, work like that back in the day was rather boring, and having some company there to pass the time away with some gossip was just what, you needed. Because of this, they hadn't heard any angry noises when the argument initially broke out, or any sounds of scuffling when the situation became physical. They were blissfully unaware that anything was wrong. That is, until they heard a scream. It was their boss. He was desperately screaming, "Help me!" with everything that he had. These women, again, had no idea what was actually going on, but they did know that the scream was definitely from their lord, and he definitely sounded in trouble, and there definitely weren't any other manservants around to go check. And so, not knowing exactly what to expect, each of these women grabbed a kitchen hammer and hurried in the direction that the scream had come from. They were there in a matter of seconds, and when they slid open the door, they found their boss pinned to the ground by the hair as this ferocious-looking warrior guy stood over him. And one of them, a little bit quicker on the uptake than the rest, noticed that the warrior guy was trying to pull the brother-in-law toward a knife on the other side of the room. As soon as she realized what was happening, she shouted, "He's gonna knife the boss!" The other women recognized the situation in an instant, and without saying any more words to each other and knowing what they needed to do, each one of these women rushed the warrior guy, who paid them seemingly no heed. Now maybe he was too busy trying to stick his intended victim. Maybe his rage had made him practically blind to anything going on around him, or maybe he didn't think that a group of servant women were capable of really doing anything to him. But whatever the reason, he was not able to react fast enough when the women all surrounded him, raised their kitchen hammers, and swung. One of them in particular hit the warrior guy square in the side of his head. Then another hit him in the front of the head, and then the back, and then the side again. Hammers came from all sides, bashing his skull repeatedly until he fell backwards, hit the ground with a solid thud. But these women understood defense, or self-defense, and they continued their assault even after the warrior guy had fallen to the ground. They beat him until he completely stopped moving. Thankfully, the text doesn't describe what the scene looked like, but I have no doubt that it wasn't pretty. It was bad enough that everyone in the room knew that the warrior guy was dead. As soon as he was free, the boss then scrambled out of this warrior dude's grip and stood back up. And then the story just basically ends there. The writer himself admits that he doesn't know what happened, but that the people of the house dealt with this situation. Sorry to leave you with such an unsatisfactory conclusion, but that's just what's in the story, and as for my part, I take solace in the fact that ending the story so abruptly is evidence that whoever was writing these down was doing his best to give an honest retelling of these stories. While I certainly wouldn't say that the stories themselves are good historical accounts or anything, I mean, half of them have literal magic in them, but neither do I think that they should be written off as completely fanciful. Weird things happen in the world, and to assume that all of the weird things that happen in these stories are purely make-believe is, I think, extremely arrogant. That being said, separating the truth from the fiction is indeed the real challenge, and, these are just great stories anyway, even if they don't end properly. But for our last little bit, we do get a little bit of opining on the events of this story, as well as a bit of a diss. And thus is it said that all those who heard this story were astonished that a warrior, known for being extremely strong and fierce, who was clearly way stronger than his brother-in-law, was done in by a group of servant girls. Take that. And so, that's actually the end of the story. I don't have very much in the way of commentary other than, general rule of no matter how angry you get at a video game, don't try to off your competition. Duh. No duh. And I am going to actually end it there. So if you did enjoy the story, please don't forget to give the video a like. Please subscribe to the channel because there are plenty more stories where this one came from. Trust me. And if you're feeling courteous, also feel free to share it around with anybody whom you think might be interested in, friends who like Japanese history, your anime friends, because that's actually how I got into classical Japanese stuff, is because I liked anime and Japanese video games first, and then one thing led to another, and bada bing, bada boom, here I am now translating 1,000-year-old Japanese folktales because, I guess I'm just weird like that. And if you've been watching all the way up to the end here, I do thank you sincerely. Ito ureshiu koso haberi kere. And hopefully we will see you next time for a story that's, again, yet another similar situation about somebody trying to off somebody close to him. And basically why you need to be very, very careful about sibling rivalries, okay? They can get out of hand. Anyways, thank you so much, guys. Have a good one. Goodbye.